Appreciate everybody coming tonight. You're here for an informational meeting about PFAS. We know there are a number of people who have other questions about other issues within the city, but we're going to try to focus ourselves today on drinking water and PFAS within the city of Lake Elmo. My name is Clark Schroeder. I was the interim city administrator for Lake Elmo a couple times, and I basically am working on special projects for the city currently. So I just do odds and ends around the city. We have a number of speakers tonight, as you can see on the agenda, from the state agencies and the city. The PowerPoint that you're going to see tonight will be on the website tomorrow, so you guys will be able to download it. In addition, if you want a copy, a hard printed copy of that, please come to City Hall, and we'll have copies sitting out in the front desk for people to take home if they don't have a computer or if they're not as comfortable with the looking at online. We'll be recording this meeting. That will be up on the website in a couple days. And because of that, we want to make sure when we get to the question and answer period that it gets recorded on the cameras that you can see around the room here. So I'll be repeating the questions because we only have one microphone and it's this one. So I don't have a microphone to pass around. So I'll be asking you to do that. If you can take a moment right now and silence your phones. There's a lot of people in this room I appreciate to not have ringing interrupt. So everybody just take a second and put your phones on silent. We're going to, right there, bing. I'm also going to ask you to hold your questions till the end. We're going to have a 25-minute period of question and answers where we'll just have individual questions, very short, that will have the experts from the state and or the city answer. So please hold them to the end. In addition, after the meeting is over, there'll be another opportunity to talk to city staff, Department of Health staff, Minnesota Pollution Control staff out in the hallway. If you have further questions on there, we'll be able to allow maybe a half hour before they kick us out of this building. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kirk from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So, you're up. Yes. I got one more thing. I should have had something besides a pencil. We do have a Spanish interpreter that is available, Alexandra, right there. And if you would like translation services, she can be out there and help you translate what you're being heard, or after the meeting, if you didn't understand what's being said, she'll be back there to be able to answer some questions in Spanish. I apologize for interrupting.
No problem. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, just want to make sure if for some reason you don't, just kind of wave or something. We do want you all to hear us. So welcome tonight. I want to join in with the city and the welcome. We have a number of folks here from state agencies. My name's Kirk Kadelka. I'm Assistant Commissioner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and you're going to be presented here by a number of folks from our agency and the Minnesota Department of Health. My discussion tonight is just to kind of kick it off and provide a little background on how we got to where we are today. So you'll see 4 sites on the map there: the Washington County landfill, Oakdale disposal site, Woodbury disposal site, and the Cottage Grove disposal site. These are sites that we know 3M disposed of various waste and others throughout history. These sites were being investigated prior to 2000 for various contaminants, but things really changed when we learned about PFAS being present in the groundwater in the East Metro area. So in 2002, the state was notified by 3M that PFAS was found in one of their production wells at their Cottage Grove facility. That set off an investigation by the state agencies, including MPCA, Department of Health, working together with 3M to find out if it was present in other locations. Then in 2004, we had the first hit in a municipal drinking water system, which was in Oakdale. From there, that moved on. The state required 3M to do sampling of municipal systems and private drinking water wells. and that worked through the following years. In 2007, we memorialized those requirements on 3M, including the sampling and work being done at these disposal sites to help remove PFAS, and then also determine where it traveled through the groundwater, what wells, private and public, were impacted, and if it exceeded a health-based value, and Department of Health will talk a little bit more about those values, they needed to provide safe drinking water to the residents. So that work continued on under the 2007 consent order, under the overview of the state. But our Superfund program, which this is under, really just looks at what is the source, remove the source, find the pathways and remove them. But even in cases where we are able to do that work, that cleanup work, the remediation work, there's still underlying impacts because of the contamination. Many times to our natural resources. Think of our drinking water, our fisheries, and others. And that's why later the state, under the Attorney Generals, along with the MPCA and Department of Natural Resources, filed what's called a Natural Resources Damages Claim in 2010. That's important because in 2018, as you can see on the slide there, we settled with 3M for $850 million for those injuries. The money is dictated by that settlement agreement on what it should be used for. You'll hear tonight the term Priority 1. We'll get into that shorthand and just want you to let you know that's about providing safe and sustainable drinking water to those impacted from those 4 disposal sites. That's where you'll see the conceptual drinking water supply plan that was finished in 2021 really focuses on how, for the 14 communities that we know have been impacted, public and private wells, what is the plan to move forward for sampling and also looking at how do we provide safe drinking water in the various different situations. Some communities and residents respond or depend on municipal drinking water systems, some on private wells. And so that's what the plan talks about. How will we move forward with that and allocating dollars for capital, large projects for communities or private wells and operation and maintenance dollars to move forward. In addition, this plan was meant to be flexible and resilient, and so we put away contingency dollars in case things were to change. The one thing you'll learn today is PFAS, we are increasingly understanding it better and better. The science is becoming more rigorous, and as a result, the technologies we're able to use to measure it, and also the impacts to individuals are better known. And so we had additional dollars set aside for those situations, and we'll learn more about that tonight. The goal here is not only to look at providing safe water, also to look at what can we do to fix the underlying problem. And so there's additional work that we're not going to focus on tonight, but we can talk about, if folks have questions later, on continuing removing the source from the contaminated sites and other work that we're doing along those lines. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at the Department of Health, and she'll talk a little bit more about PFAS.
I had to lower it here. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Close, and I am a scientist with the Minnesota Department of Health. And I'm going to talk to you about PFAS and health effects tonight. So we need to get one thing out in the open, first of all, and that is that PFAS science is fast moving. So what we know today is going to change a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. There'll be new data coming out. Someone asked me upstairs tonight how many publications or new studies have come out in the last week. I don't know about the last week, but I went to the PubMed website, which is just health studies, and in the last year, 1,400 came out. So it is a lot of information and a lot of data. So we do the best we can to stay on top of it to protect everybody's health. So some of you are experts at this because you've dealt with PFAS before, and some of it is new to you. So I'm just going to go over a background slide here. So PFAS is a family of chemicals, and there's over 5,000 chemicals in this family. And they're called the poly and perfluoroalkyl substances. And what puts them in this family is that they were created in the 1940s, and they have these fluorine and carbon bonds in them. And these are incredibly stable. They were made to be indestructible, and they are indestructible so far. So they're called forever chemicals because they don't break down in the environment and they don't break down in us. So When you think about these 5,000 chemicals, we have guidance values for 6. And that is because there is just little toxicity information or studies on the rest of the PFAS chemicals. So where are PFAS? They're everywhere. They're in us. So everyone across the globe has PFAS in their blood serum. They're also in our drinking water, and they're also in the products we use. The majority of your PFAS exposures are going to be in the products, everyday products you use in your house. If something you have says it's grease-proof, waterproof, or stain-proof, chances are it's got one of those 5,000 PFAS chemicals in them. So it's everywhere from your stain-resistant carpeting, waterproof upholstery in your furniture, nail polish, electronics, cell phones. It's in your dental floss and shampoo. It's in your water-resistant mascara. The dust in your home has it from the products breaking down. The PFAS is released. It's in your furniture, candy wrappers, and then even in the containers for our food, like your pizza boxes and your microwave popcorn bags. So we're all exposed. It's everywhere. And again, as Department of Health, we want to reduce your overall exposure. And so drinking water, we're talking about tonight, that's one of your exposures. But you also have all these products around you that have PFAS in them. And if you are an anxious person like me and you want to reduce your overall exposure, you can start looking at the labels of things that you're buying. And what's going to help us a lot is that next year Amara's law goes into effect. So some goods sold in Minnesota cannot have PFAS in them. So that is going to help reduce all of our exposures a lot. So some of you may be wondering, like, why do the levels of PFAS that are allowable in water keep going down in Minnesota? And that's because, as I told you earlier, it's a fast-moving science realm, right? So 1,400 publications came out just within the last year. So back in 2002, when PFAS was first discovered in our water, we had to come out with guidance values for what we knew then, the few available toxicity studies that we could get our hands on. So you can see back in 2002, we had guidance for PFOA at 7,000 nanograms per liter, and for PFAS at 1,000. And just in that time, as more and more data comes out, our numbers kept dropping. More data came out, we had to review what we had to protect everybody. The numbers had to drop again. And then in 2024, this year, epidemiology studies came out. That's human studies. And with those, we had to drop them again. So it's a constantly moving target. Okay, so why are we concerned about PFAS? Well, one of the first things we notice is that PFAS behaves differently in the body than other chemicals. So we talked about it first. It doesn't break down, right? So if you are exposed continuously to PFAS, it builds up in your body. And second of all, you can pass that PFAS along to a fetus and an infant. So the fetus and the infant become our most sensitive population because they're often born with the same or similar levels of PFAS in their blood serum as the mom. And then as the mom breastfeeds, it's passed through the milk. So when we make our guidance values, we focus on this most sensitive population. So the numbers protect this group of people and then everybody else. And so again, this slide just kind of shows you the health effects that we have for children and infants. So one of the things that makes them most susceptible is that they drink more water and milk on a per body weight than any other life stage. So they're drinking more, and secondly, they have that hand-to-mouth behavior. They're crawling on the carpet, they're touching the household dust, they're putting their hand in their mouth, so their exposure goes up. So potential health risks, this is from epidemiology studies, they're correlated with lower birth weights and then a reduced response to vaccination. Now, if we look at the adult population, most of us have spent our whole lives exposed to PFAS, either in water or in products around us. And it comes from, again, many different sources. So these are from epidemiology studies. Again, those are human studies. So as your level of PFAS goes up, you have an increased risk for cholesterol changes, some liver enzyme changes, and then some cancers, so particularly kidney and testicular. Does that mean you're going to get these if you're above a certain level? No. It just means that the risk starts increasing. The more you're exposed, the longer you're exposed. And what we do know, though, however, is that if you reduce your exposure, your blood levels go down. So this is a graph for those of you who love statistics and graphs. This is the different PFAS over time. This is national data. So blood just taken around the country, and these are averages. So you see, started in 1999, 2000, and then PFAS was phased out. So 3M and other industries voluntarily stopped putting PFAS in a lot of the products, but we know they're still out there. You can see the levels come down in blood over time. So this is showing that when you intervene and you stop exposures, the blood levels, it goes down. This is East Metro data. So the red bars are the US population in 2014. These are averages, so average concentrations of these different PFAS in the blood. And then this was from a study done with about 150 residents. Some of you might be here that are part of the study. So blood was tested before intervention in 2008. And then again, it was tested in 2010 and 2014. And you can see a reduction over the years in the PFAS levels in the blood. So this is great news, right? You stop the exposure and then the levels go back down. And I don't know, it'd be really interesting to see 2024, 10 years later, how close we're getting to the average background. And again, that average background that you see there is probably most likely from consumer products and from the things we're exposed to every day in our houses and in our lives. And so with that, my final message is, for those of you that are more anxious, like myself, you have things you can do to reduce exposure. For other people, it's your safety level. How much risk are you willing to take? So some people, this is good news enough, right? So I'm going to end it there and pass it on to Rebecca.
Hi, I am Rebecca Place. I work at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency as the 3M Settlement Coordinator. I am here to talk to you about private well sampling. These numbers are from our legislative report, so they are through December 31st of last year. Sampling began in 2003. We have roughly 7,000 to 8,000 private wells in the East Metro area. We've sampled roughly over half of them. And this doesn't include, there's been almost 300 this year, so these numbers will go up. But 1,500 number of private well advisories issued, and Lake Elmo's numbers are included in these numbers. In a couple slides, I'll show you those numbers. Point of entry treatment systems, we've installed just under 1,200. And those, you'll hear the word POET, point of entry treatment system. That is a whole home treatment system. We also use the word GAC, that's granulated activated carbon, and that's the type of filtration that's within that POET system. So you'll hear those terms interchanged. And then 393 homes have been connected to municipal water. Recent impacts to the private well sampling program, as Chris said, the Department of Health lowered the health-based values in January of 2024. That means that right away we know that 650 wells that didn't previously have an advisory would be triggered into the well advisory status. And then 1,300 residential wells need to be resampled using that new methodology that can test to the lower level. So in Lake Elmo, there are roughly 1,300 private drinking water wells. 694 wells have been sampled. There's been 252 of those point of entry treatment systems installed, and 230 homes have been connected to municipal water. So our process for private well sampling is that once we have the resident's permission, a technician comes in and collects a sample, and then those results are, it's analyzed by the lab. Those results are reviewed by MPCA and MDH. If it's determined that there's not a well advisory, a letter would be sent at this point saying there's no well advisory. But otherwise it goes to Department of Health, reviewed again, and then issued a well advisory. And then bottled water is offered by the Pollution Control Agency with that advisory as an interim fix until the point of entry treatment system can be put on the home. And then once we have a signed access agreement to come into the home, then that point of entry treatment system is put on. And then the filters are changed out annually. Our priorities for the private well sampling program are to work through that 1,300 backlog of residences that need to be resampled with the new method. We think that's going to take roughly 1 to 2 years where we've been working on it. Then continuing to define the plume and monitor wells at the edges of the plume and monitor new test, watch out for new areas within the East Metro that are seeing the PFAS for the first time and investigate that. And then for continuing resources, I'm going to go to this slide first. This is on our website. If you Google MPCA private well sampling, it'll pop up. Otherwise, it's on the fact sheets that we've passed out. It's here on this presentation. But this is updated weekly. The blue dots are residential wells that have a well advisory, and the green dots are residential wells that do not have a well advisory that have been tested. And then the black squares are monitoring wells. In this zoomed in map for Lake Elmo, you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, the monitoring wells are around the Washington County landfill area. And what's not showing on this map is the 650 wells that we know as of those new health-based values that now have advisories. So that we're working to put those on here. And so if you look back in the coming weeks, you'll see that. In Lake Elmo, there's 234 of that 650 are in Lake Elmo, and some of them are in the Tri-Lakes area. Oh, so I did want to talk about resources real quick. We understand that taking a sample in the fall of 2023 and getting your results in the summer of 2024 is not acceptable, and that is not our standard operating procedure. That causes, frustration and stress, and that is not our goal. We had kind of a perfect storm when those health-based values came down. We also had a lot of staff turnover in our unit, and we had a retirement and someone go to grad school, and so now we lost 5 staff, but now we have new staff, and we're up and running. We're working through that backlog. We're really getting rolling at the speed that we want to be. And we're also looking at increasing resources for how many samples can be taken through additional laboratory resources or working with other state labs that are verified and on our state contract. And also contractors, getting another contractor on for installing those point of entry treatment systems. We want to avoid creating a large bottleneck in the process. So we're looking at where we can increase resources throughout the process. And then, so for monitoring the plume, there's the 4 disposal sites we mentioned, and monitoring continues at all 4 of those sites. And 3M continues to work. Both the PCA and 3M are doing work at the disposal sites. I won't go into too much detail with that, but also with the Project 1007, that if you haven't heard of it, it's a conveyance system to reduce flooding in the Tri-Lakes area that was constructed in 1987, and unfortunately it inadvertently spread PFAS across the metro. So we're continuing to look around that corridor for areas of concern. And then here's just a couple items. If you need to have your well sampled, you can sign up online on our private well sampling request form. I will pass it off to Lucas.
I'm a little taller, so I don't know if this thing goes up, but can everybody hear me okay? All right, great. My name's Lucas Martin. I'm a district engineer with the Minnesota Department of Health. So I go and do testing on the public drinking water systems. That would be the city of Lake Elmo or any public water supply, especially community public water supplies. So that's what I came to talk to you about today is what work we've done with the city and the public water supplies to regulate their water system. The above picture is kind of an example of some of the work that we've done with some of the cities in the East Metro. That's a large treatment plant that was put in recently in the East Metro area to treat and remove PFAS contamination from that city's drinking water. And there will be a lot more of those going in. There have been a bunch going in, and there's going to be a lot more and bigger ones going in the future as part of that settlement funding is being applied to treat and remove these contaminants from the drinking water. So public water supplies are regulated through the EPA's Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. So there's through the Code of Federal Regulations, there's requirements and enforceable limits that public water supplies need to meet for certain types of contaminants. In April of this year, so just a few months ago, PFAS were added to that regulation. So PFAS now have, as of April of this year, have enforceable standards that public water supplies will need to meet in the future. Those enforcement standards include what's called maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs. So those are the actual contaminant level that water system has to maintain below that level. And so they're identified in the regulations for that. And then for this particular regulation, they created something called a hazard index. We actually do something similar to this and have been in our state. It's essentially PFAS occur in a mixture, right? We talked to you about there's 5,000 different PFAS. We test for about 26 different PFAS together in the testing that we do. So we can detect multiple PFAS together in a sample. So it's important that we look at the combined exposure to that. And that's what that hazard index, does. And we've also been doing that with our state guidance with what's called a health risk index too. So this table shows you the actual numbers for what the maximum contaminant levels are that a public water system is required to meet for each one of the types of PFAS that are being regulated. The first thing I would mention, we're talking about parts per trillion here. No one's really gone into like sort of what that means, right? What is a part per trillion, right? So a lot of you probably don't really know. So it's a part per trillion is 1 unit volume of contaminant in 1 trillion unit volumes of water. So an easy way to maybe visualize that is 1 drop of water in about 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So it's a really small amount of contamination that we're talking about. And the fact that we can actually detect this stuff in the water too is very recent. So at this level, at these part per trillion levels, detecting that has taken its own advances in the actual standards, the laboratory methods that have been created. So what we're going to focus on with the water primarily is this PFOA and PFOS, the one that are highlighted there. They have the lower limits. They're the ones that we see more often out of these on this table. And they're the ones that usually are driving these health advisories that are being sent to private water to private wells, or driving the health risk advisories or violations from this rule by the public water systems. So the other ones that are on here, the PFHXS, we have seen that in other places in the state, including in the East Metro area. In the Lake Elmo area, that one doesn't really have much of a factor. Gen X is one that you hear talked about maybe in the news nationally. There's been some places other places in the nation that have seen that, specifically where that type of PFAS has been manufactured nearby. We haven't seen it. We've tested all of our, throughout the state, we have not seen any detection of that in the entire state. So that one for us in Minnesota is not really a factor either. PFNA is also detected very infrequently. We have seen a few detections of it, but nothing near that 10 part per trillion. So again, not really looking at that. And then there's this hazard index, which essentially takes an additive assessment of that PFHXS, Gen X, PFNA, and then one additional contaminant, PFBS, that we have seen, that we do see at low levels. I'm not going to talk about the actual calculation or that hazard index because for Lake Elmo, that we're not seeing those types of contaminants in the water at a level that makes this hazard index any kind of a factor at all. We're really just focusing on PFOA and PFOS. So part of the reason that we're talking to you about this today, and that we're able to talk about this today, is that we've been really proactive in actually testing the drinking water. We've been doing drinking water testing for PFAS, I think probably the longest in the nation. We were one of the first that started testing drinking water for these contaminants. And so we've been doing very frequent testing, especially in the East Metro area, for these contaminants. We've also started, back in 2021, we started testing the entire state for these contaminants ahead of when these regulations came out. We didn't wait for EPA to come out with regulations. We knew that these contaminants are in drinking water in certain areas, and we wanted to find out where else in the state that might be, so that when these regulations come out, we're ready we know where it is and we know where the contamination is, and we can already work with the water systems to address the issue. So, like I mentioned, the testing methods have gotten a lot more sensitive, so we're able to see these contaminants at a lot lower levels now, especially within the last few years. So there's been some new testing methods that have come out. We're able to detect a lot lower than we used to be. So in Lake Elmo, we started sampling back in about 2007 in Lake Elmo. The first PFOA detections in the Lake Elmo city's water supply we started seeing them show up in about 2011. That was in the well number 2, one of their 3 wells that they're currently using. The other 2 wells at that time, we were not seeing those detections of that contaminant. I've met a few people from Cimarron Park that are here, so I know there's some people here from that water supply. That is also public water supply. They have their own wells. They supply that community. We also test that water system the same way we test and regulate. They're also regulated in the same way that the city's water system is tested and regulated and required to be. So, we started testing there as well a while ago. We didn't start seeing either PFOA or PFOS in that water system through our testing until 2022, so a little bit more recently. Before that, we weren't seeing it there. The one thing I would just mention is that both the city's water system and Cimarron Park's water system have met our state Department of Health guidance for these contaminants prior to this year. So it's not the contaminant level that's changed, it's our understanding of these contaminants and how they affect or potentially may affect people's health and what the health risk is that's changed. So this kind of shows just a chart of the cities of Lake Elmo's 3 wells and what those PFOA and PFOS contaminant levels are. They don't have any PFOS in the cities. All 3 of the city's wells, we have not detected that contaminant. But as you can see, well number 2 does have PFOA above that 4 part per trillion regulatory limit. So because of that, now that these regulations are out, and with us having already tested and been testing these wells, we know and can work with the city on this issue and what their future plans are for making changes to their water system in the future. And I think the city's going to talk about that. We have seen some lower level detections of PFOA in their other two wells much more recently as these detection levels have gone down, but they've been quite a bit lower than this regulatory limit. So, and then for Cimarron Park, what we've seen in their wells is that both of their wells have contaminant levels above these regulatory limits through the EPA. So they are right in the planning stages right now of working with the state and through the settlement, through the statewide 3M settlement, to start planning for what their solution is going to be. Most likely treatment, but there may be a couple options available to them too. So this EPA regulation requires a few things of water supplies. First, they have to test the water supply for these contaminants. We've already done that, so, but we didn't wait for this regulation to come out. So we're sort of ahead of the game on this. But this, as of April of this year, EPA started requiring public water systems to begin testing for it through the next 3 years, and to complete that initial testing within the next 3 years, so by 2027. We've already done it, so that's done. The next, inform the public. So in your consumer confidence report, the public water supplies are required to send out every year through either their website or a mailer, a notice about their consumer confidence report that shows detections of what's been in their water based on the testing that we've done. PFAS will be required to be added to that. And actually, we're also a little bit, the communities in this area have been more proactive about that as well. So, you know, Lake Elmo's been including PFAS in their consumer confidence report, as well as we just worked with this year, starting with this year's consumer confidence report for Cimarron Park. I believe they included PFAS in that as well. So, and then they're required to take action. So eventually, if these water systems, the rule requires after 5 years of implementation, so 2029 is the point at which the water systems would receive an actual violation of this rule. That gives time to plan and implement changes ahead of that, which we plan on doing and working with the water systems through the settlement and the funding that's available. And we would go into, if a water system did receive a violation, we would come into some kind of a signed compliance agreement through the state and the water system to provide a plan to show what changes they're going to make and how they're going to meet these standards. One of the other things we did to inform the public when we started testing the entire state for PFAS was create a public-facing PFAS dashboard on our website. So there's been some news, publicity about this. You can go on our website. You can just search for PFAS dashboard Minnesota or whatever. It should be the first thing that comes up. And it's an interactive map where you can search on the map, zoom in on your community, and click on the dot that's on the community, and it'll pull up the detections based on the sampling we've done, what's been seen in the water system. So we did that for just statewide, because we tested the entire state. We wanted to make sure that information was readily available for people. So there's a few things that water systems can do to address PFAS contamination. One of the things some water systems have done is shut down a well that's higher in PFAS. So you saw Lake Elmo had that one well out of their 3 wells has that contaminant limit over that regulatory level. The city will likely talk more about what they're doing about that. Sometimes if wells connect together, you can blend the water. A lot of people don't like that idea because it's still there, right? It's just at a lower level. You're doing it to kind of meet that lower level, but not really getting rid of the contaminant. But there are some water systems that do what's called blending to meet those standards, to make sure that the water supply to the system is below that regulatory limit. Or there's treatment. So the 3 types of treatment that are applied for PFAS are reverse osmosis, ion exchange. There's different newer kinds of ion exchange media. This isn't the same kind of ion exchange that's like in your softeners. It's not the same. Your softeners don't remove these contaminants. It's a very specialized type of newer media that's being tested right now. So, and granular activated carbon, which has already been talked about a little bit. So a lot of people ask, well, what about home treatment? What can I do in the meantime if these contaminant levels aren't zero yet in the water supply to my home? That might be the long-term plan, but for the next few years, what do I do, right? And so a lot of people have asked about home treatment. So there are point of use. What I would say is look at something that's for point of use at where you get your drinking water, at your kitchen sink. You don't, and so those are the more affordable options, right? And so there are like water filters that can clip onto your faucet. We've actually tested a couple of those. They work really well as long as they're granular activated carbon filters, which the ones that we tested are. They work pretty well to remove these contaminants. So we have some testing information on our website about the ones that we tested that are similar to that. So a little more affordable option. Also, reverse osmosis systems that like go installed under your sink for your kitchen sink is another option for home treatment. What I would say is any option that you're looking at for home treatment, you want to make sure that there's a certification program called NSF, National Sanitation Foundation. They certify the products for removal of these contaminants. You want to check and make sure that they're certified and that maybe there is certification on the packaging that says that they actually remove these contaminants. The last thing I would say is that if you do install a home water filter, maintenance is very important. So don't just install it and don't ever change it out. The reason is because you can end up with bacteria growth in those filters. Bacteria likes to grow in these filters. It's actually a really good environment for bacteria growth. So if you just install it and leave it and never change the filter out, you're going to end up with really nasty filters with bacteria all over them, and you could get sick from that and actually get acute illness, and you definitely don't want that. So you do need to be making sure that you change these filters out according to the manufacturer's recommendations. And if you want more information about home treatment, we actually have an entire website page specifically about PFAS home treatment. So I would encourage you to just, again, online search MDH PFAS home treatment. It'll be the first thing that shows up, and please go there if you want more information about that.
Good evening. My name's Jack Griffin, and I'm the city engineer for Lake Elmo. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're doing and what our plans are for the municipal water system, or the public drinking water system for Lake Elmo. So it's hard to talk about the system without, I first want to orient you to this map, because you're going to see a lot of this for this presentation. But really what you're seeing is the city of Lake Elmo, and you see a lot of these dark lines, and these are the trunk water main distribution lines. So currently, or for historically, Lake Elmo has had 3 wells that Lucas was talking about. We call them Well 2, Well 4, and Well 5. They're all located up in the northeast quadrant of the city. And they pump into the distribution system, and then it carries it to every user that's connected to Lake Elmo. So everybody in Lake Elmo that's connected to city water is getting their water from these 3 wells. They basically all blend together within the distribution system. There isn't treatment other than a couple of chemical additions. Historically, we've not had to treat our wells. We've had a very clean water supply. And as we were going through in past years, the plan, when the contamination first started showing up in 2004, 2005 in Lake Elmo, the contamination was showing up down here in the southern region. We drilled a well, what we call well number 3. We never put it in service because it was down here in the contaminant level. But now, just recently, as Lucas just presented, we now have the contamination in well 2, and we have to provide treatment for that well or discontinue using the water. So our supplies with these 3 wells, just for information, these are the capacities of those wells. And we also are a growing community, and as we continue to add users, whether it's through new development or whether it's through connecting neighborhoods that are existing because of the PFAS contamination, We need more wells in the future, and that's typical of every community, is you need to keep adding to your water system. And our plan was to, when you look at our 2040 comp plan and we look at our growth plan, we were planning on adding 2 more wells before 2040. We're needing to add well 6, which is basically needed this year or next year. And right after that, we're gonna need well 7. And that's for a whole number of reasons, and because of where the city's going, we're needing to add to the system. The plan was to locate those wells up north. That was the historic plan. And as I mentioned, since well 2 is now showing up that it's got PFAS in it above those thresholds, we've now abandoned that plan. We're calling that plan no longer feasible, and we basically took a pause and pivoted, and that was a decision made by the city council just last year. So what is the plan? Well, the first part of the plan is to very quickly, basically on an accelerated project delivery schedule, the plan is to put treatment on well number 2. So already Public Works, who operates the water system, has reduced that the well's only been being used on an extremely limited basis, really only on your peak summer days when irrigation's really maximized and we're having a hard time keeping the water towers full. It's the only time it's turned on. So we're fundamentally operating on the 2 wells 4 and 5 right now. And what we've done is we've gone to the 3M settlement funding and we applied for grant money to do this study, to pivot this project and to identify whether treatment was feasible or not. We finished that planning. We determined that putting treatment on there is feasible, and we're beginning the design stages of that project right now. So we're just entering in design and construction. The idea is to put a IX PFAS treatment facility constructed on well number 2, and then we're hoping to have that online before those peak summer demands in 2025. So this is just, for those that like these kinds of things, this is well house number 2. And it's a pretty large building because it used to house a hydromatic tank and also a generator, and neither one of those are used. So that turned out to be very convenient for us. Normally the well house is only big enough to house the well. But because we have this added space, we have this opportunity to put these 2 treatment facility, this is what they look like. We have this opportunity, they fit very nicely in that vacated space. We do have to take the roof off that area and raise the roof because these are 15-foot high pressure filters. So we'll start to see this summer, we'll start to work on building modifications, raising that roof and getting these filters installed. And as I mentioned, the whole goal is to have that operational for any peak demands by next year. So then moving forward, we also, in order to meet our growing demands, we also need to begin planning for well 6 and 7. And as I mentioned before, we're no longer going to look at the northern part of the city to construct those wells. We're coming down into the south area where most of the growth is anyway, and we're going to be putting in 2 wells down here in the south, and the green dots representing a water treatment plant. So rather than just pumping into the distribution system as they previously done, these wells will pump directly, both of them will pump directly to a water treatment plant, and it'll either be a GAC filter system or it'll be a IX and an exchange filter system, but the water will be treated and then pumped into the distribution system. So at that point, when we get this system online, and again, the goal is to have this one online by the spring of 2027, and have 1 to 2 more wells in operation. So at that point, we'll have wells, these 2 new wells, and we'll still have these 3 wells with well 2 being treated. So it'll be 2 separate treatment plants, basically. And then we've also spent some time studying wells 4 and 5. Lucas showed the chart where it showed there's hits or traces of evidence that there might be PFAS starting in wells 4 and 5, but they don't rise to that threshold of needing treatment. So we did look at this as a contingency plan and have developed a plan looking to make sure we have enough space in the location of where well number 5 is, that if and when the time comes that we need to address these 2 wells with treatment, we can put another treatment plant in this location and do a raw water line to combine these two wells and bring those two wells to a north treatment plant. So then we would have one treatment plant here for wells 4 and 5, this treatment down here for these two new wells, and well number 2 would have its separate treatment facility that we're working on right now today. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is connecting neighborhoods. When the settlement funds first occurred in 2018, as I mentioned, we felt we had a clean water supply, and what we were talking about with using those funds was to connect existing neighborhoods that had a lot of well advisories in them to the water system. So these are all neighborhoods that were already constructed, already had private wells operating. They had more homes combined in certain areas, so it makes it a little more cost effective to bring in city water lines to those. And then also those neighborhoods, it was time for their streets to be reconstructed. So it was timing out well that we're tearing up their streets anyway. Water was already nearby in the trunk water lines. So the these blue-purple numbers represent all the projects we have completed since 2018. So we've connected properties, 292 properties in all of these neighborhoods shown here in blue with separate projects. So we were bringing water main into those neighborhoods. In our capital improvement plan, we have a plan to continue doing that. In 2025, we were going to extend water into the Homestead neighborhood, and in 2026, we were going to go into the Packard Park, Eden Park neighborhood. These two neighborhoods were approved in the clean drinking water supply plan based on the metrics they were using as to where it was cost effective. We've recently been informed that program is being paused. So we don't know what that means yet. That's very new information to us. But there's going to be a delay at the very least in this, of whether this program continues to happen or not. So we don't see these two connections happening as planned in 2025 or 2026. And then the sort of yellow-orange color here were neighborhoods the city was still continuing to argue for or advocate for based on densities being close to city water, being more cost-effective to get connected to city water. All those reasons, we were still advocating for those, but they were not in the clean drinking water supply plan as approved neighborhoods. They were listed as neighborhoods that as testing would continue, they would continue to be looked at and analyzed and could maybe be brought in. But now, as we stand today with the status of the settlement funds, again, that's beginning to look unlikely. So I think the big news, and this is news just for the city even in July of this year, is that this program that we were on is getting paused, and that pause could be permanent. And then the city is also beginning to compile information on the website. So I just put up here, if you go to the City of Lake Elmo homepage, and there's a button for water, and then this is what it'll look like. And the city is beginning to really amass different pieces of information and things like that for you to go to. And that's all I have.
Wow, that was a lot of information. Thank you for all the experts that had something to say about this. So, a lot of information to take in. Couple ways you can get it. PowerPoint will be online on that city website that Jack just showed, and we'll put that up tomorrow or the next day. We'll also have printed copies of that PDF that you just saw, so the links will be there, the contact information will be there, and the names of the people who spoke will be there. Then we'll have that at City Hall. Just come up to City Hall. I think City Hall has summer hours tomorrow, only open till noon on Fridays. So they'll be open regular hours after that. The MPCA handouts that were in back, they probably ran out, so they'll have those on the website. And we're gonna have 20 minutes here of question and answers. And remember that we only have one microphone, which is right here. So when we get to this point here, you can raise your hand. I'll repeat the question for one of the experts. He'll come up and speak to that question, but we don't have anything to hand around. And people who are leaving, if you could just keep going down the hall so it doesn't get so noisy for the rest of the audience in here to hear, we would appreciate that. So with that, I'll start taking questions. Question right here.
This question is for the MPCA. In 2023, you produced this report for the state legislature that said that everyone in the area currently has safe water. Okay, we have at least one resident that's been on a carbon system for a year and a half. We've only found out this recently and accidentally as neighbors started talking to each other. We have at least 5 more wells that are that have been tested and identified as contaminated, and yet we have had no communication from either the Department of Health or the Pollution Control Agency that we should even be worried about testing our wells. And so that leads me to question number 2, because
What your first question was what? I have to repeat it for the cameras.
why haven't they been notifying us?
So,
that, you know,
so
tell us?
the first question is, why has not the Department of Health been communicating with people that are next to wells that maybe have a well advisory?
That their wells might be contaminated because the plume has moved.
All right, who wants to take that question? All right, Kirk's going to take that question.
Thank you. So the procedure that we're using is when we get results from individuals, we communicate that directly with the individual. That's their information to share as how they would like to, the exact specifics. We do supply information in mass. We saw the presentation, there was the purple and green dots, where we are sharing that information on a wider basis through that method, because it's easier to share that information to a large number of folks. As noted, there are over 7,000 individuals with private wells. Adding that communication to others in the area of what their neighbors' results are would just slow down our work, which we're trying to focus on the sampling work. In terms of who gets sampled and when, what we're looking at historically has been where are we seeing contamination and have not sampled wells already, and then move in those areas and focus on that areas. When there's changes to the health-based values, such as occurred this year, or the new federal standards, that really changes how we have to do this. We have to start over and look at everything again, because those numbers are much lower now, where wells at one point may have sampled for being safe and not exceeding those levels, may now exceed those levels, or we have technology that changes. We can measure things to much lower numbers that we couldn't before. And as a result, that's how we kind of see waves of the agency going out and sampling areas because of the changes in reacting to those changes.
Thank you. To be fair to everybody, I'll come back to you if there was a time for a second question. Sir, red shirt.
Yes. Is there somewhere on the website, or can you put something up that would show the water flow at depths in the ground for the area, so we can kind of look at where our well is, how deep we are, and figure out maybe where we stand in the flow of the PFCs?
Thanks for the question. It's not something we have readily available at the state to be able to provide that. It was mentioned the one project 1007. That is a project that we're doing, and some of the information we will be able to share is where we know wells are sampled, including some of our own monitoring wells that we've put in on the depths that has some of that information. Although, again, just the way this travels, though, different depths in that may not be necessarily the great indicator whether or not a well is contaminated or not.
All right, question. I'm going to take one on the far side.
So, I don't remember your numbers, but if a well was tested, say, 5 years ago, and at the time it was beneath the acceptable levels, but now that levels have moved down, down, and down, does that trigger an advisory because at the time it was tested, it is now unacceptable?
So the answer is it depends. It depends on the method that was used. If it was a good method that we feel is still reliable, those are the 650 that you saw on the list, which were those situations just that you said. We had a really good detection method that we believe in, that's showing accurate results, and is now exceeding those numbers. And so those are the homes that we are reaching out to now to provide treatment. Those where we may not have the right number, the right method, some of these methods would have not shown it even that low. It would have only shown it if it was much higher. So we have to go back and sample those folks to make sure that we have the most sensitive testing methods to get down to some of these numbers. Those are the 1,300 additional homes that we have to go back and sample with that new method to be able to see if we can really see down to those levels which we were not able to see before. I hope that helps, and we can talk through some more afterwards too if you'd like.
Okay, I have, going back to this side, the lady there.
I'm in the Tri-Lakes. I have a property adjacent to a well that is getting delivered water for a description. I recently had my well tested. I've been told it's gonna be 3 months before I get the results. But as you said, you're monitoring the city's well supplies. What happens if my test comes back and it is under the threshold, but this situation is evolving? What protections are in place for us residents who may then see contamination at a later date from this plume moving? I might not qualify today for a water system, but I might next year. So what is being put in place for future protections for everyone?
So what we have done historically is re-examine those wells on different times or on the edge of the plume that may not exceed at that time, but we want to make sure they don't exceed in the future. So depending on how close they may have been to the number, we had a frequency, maybe it's every other year or every year, to go back and sample a couple as tests. Right now, because we have a very large number of wells we need to sample, those are going to be our priority first, because those are wells that may not have been sampled before, or we have some information that is likely they may have an exceedance and we want to go get to those. But that is built into our long-term program, is monitoring over time on the edges where it may have been under the number at this time, but we want to keep an eye on for various reasons.
In the middle area, who's next here? Guy way in back.
Yeah, what was the treatment that was just recently removed at Tablin Park? There was some water treatment going on at some of the city wells or the city samples.
So the question was the treatment, if you've driven by Tablin Park, there's a blue container there. That is called a SAF system, and they basically are pumping water either out of the ground or out of Riley Creek, and they're testing techniques to basically remove the PFAS from the water due to aeration and filtration, and then they're skimming it off and then sending the PFAS to be treated elsewhere. This is a pilot study, so it's just being dumped back into, after it's being cleansed, it's being dumped back into Riley Creek at a cleaner level than they pumped it out of. So it's just a developing technology that I just happen to know about because I toured it a couple weeks ago. It was very interesting, by the way. Thank you for the tour. There is some information down there on the board to walk by and see. All right, next question. Way in the back, blue shirt.
I appreciate that it costs a lot of money to do the things that you're doing and to manage this problem, and I appreciate you guys spending it wisely and working so hard on it. It's wonderful. Is the $850 million settlement sufficient to cover all those costs, or will there be continuing ongoing additional financial burdens to the citizens of Lake Elmo and to all the citizens in the area to continue to cover and manage these costs?
So I'll speak a little bit to that. As the former interim city administrator, I did learn something about this at least. So as you can, oh, sorry, I apologize. The question was on the 3M settlement with the $850 million, is that enough money to cover the contamination cleanup for the current needs and future needs for the citizens of Lake Elmo? So the answer to that is no. The money will be running out. We are working with the trustees. This fund has been managed via a settlement with trustees, and we anticipate it's going to run out in the next few years. After that, we have transitioned to a consent decree that 3M had signed with the state in 2007? 2007. So what's happening now is the trustees and the state are working with how does that transition work? What will the management of that consent decree, which does not have a capped limit, but it's going to have to go through some sort of approval system. Right now, like the treatment plant that Jack is talking about down in the south area, that's maybe $45 million. Jack writes a report, he does some analysis, it goes to the trustees of the $850 million fund. They in turn will give it this or give it up or down on that. So we know what the process is for writing the grants and for the approvals of the grants. So they're developing what's going to happen when that $850 million runs dry, and what they're trying to do is make sure we don't start any projects that can't be finished under that, but they want to make sure that projects that start under the consent decree start under that. So that's still a work in progress. We're still working on it. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add from their group? All right. Tony, you had a question.
Yes, can you tell us where we can find the results of the analysis of the samples from the monitoring wells?
Hello, Andrea Dahlmeyer from the MPCA. So we do have, when we have results from the private wells, we try to send those out in a letter as soon as we're able to. Also, that online map that Rebecca showed earlier that had all the blue and green dots, you can look at those and click on them and get some results from some of those wells as well. But the first way you'll see them is when we mail it out to you.
I'm sorry, you misinterpreted my question.
Oh, sure.
I'm asking, you drilled a lot of very deep monitoring wells around the city. Where are the results from those samples from those wells?
Okay, yep, just to repeat that, so you wanted to know where the results are from all the wells that we've drilled. So monitoring wells, those do go, yep, they go pretty deep. So those are all gonna be included in our feasibility study. So we're working on that report now. It should be done later this year. And that is all revolving around that Project 1007 that folks had mentioned earlier. So we're gonna compile all of the data from the over 100 wells that we've drilled kind of along that area. So that'll be all available in that report.
Later this year it'll be publicly available.
Yep, it'll be made publicly available, yep.
All right, next question. Sir.
All right, I live in Lake Elmo, on Lake Olson, and I've seen your final drinking water plan. And the final drinking water plan says my well will not have any treatment or connection to a municipal supply. It's never been tested. So who is making the decision that my well will never get treated when it has never been tested?
So in terms of the municipal water, it was alluded to earlier, we did a cost-benefit analysis to see whether we treat a whole home system or a municipal well. What is covered is a snapshot of what we knew and had as sampling at that time in the conceptual drinking water supply plan. However, the plan talks about, as we continue to monitor, if we find new municipal wells or private wells, they would be provided treatment. That's really driven by the sampling so that we could have that information available, knowing if things may change, such as the health-based values that the Department of Health talked about recently. So, especially on those edges where we continue to sample, and if we see exceedances, those wells may today not look like they're getting treatment or don't have information to show they're getting treated, but if they have data to show they're exceeding the numbers, then they would be eligible for treatment. The plan is meant to be flexible. It's not a one-time decision for the future.
Well, following up on that, I had a talk with Ms. Dahlmeyer, and apparently there's around 2,000 wells that need to be tested, private wells. And as I understand it, last year, your report indicated there were 243 private wells actually sampled and tested. And at that rate, it's going to take over 8 years to get the 2,000 that you have now done. What's the plan to move this along and get people analyzing it?
Mm-hmm. Great question. The question was, there are a lot more wells today, and we mentioned some of the numbers, 1,300 and that, and historically we have not been able to do that in a year. So what is the agency's plans to move that forward? One is we're looking at, and mentioned briefly by Rebecca, is that we're looking for additional places to do the testing. So labs that will be able to run the data that are acceptable in terms of the quality control so that we can trust them to be able to do more wells per week, per month, per year. That is something we have to grow and will increase over time if we're able to bring on additional capacity. So that is, you're correct, we haven't sampled that much in a year before, but we are looking to bring on additional resources to be able to meet that need. It will take some time, unfortunately, and know we've talked to some of the folks here today who are experiencing some of those delays. We apologize for those. We are working to bring on more resources to do that, but that is kind of what a state will probably be in for the next few months too, unfortunately, until we can get the new resources in place.
All right, green shirt.
I understand there is a backlog for testing, as you said several times, but what is the frequency that you're going to test those two? City wells and the private wells?
So frequency of wells, we're going to take team here. I'll start with the private wells since MPCA's. The frequency of sampling of wells, public and private. So for the private wells, we go and collect the information. If you have an exceedance, we just move forward to providing treatment to that home, that individual private well. Once they receive treatment, they do not need additional testing. If they do not exceed that number, as I mentioned earlier, once we are gone through all the sampling, we'll start putting what we'll call some sentinel wells, or pick a few wells along the edges to sample periodically to keep an eye on areas to make sure that things are not changing as we move on in time. So there is a frequency in terms of if it hasn't exceeded, we're going to do periodic testing across the East Metro, some in Lake Elmo, but other parts of the East Metro too. Lucas, do you want to talk about the municipal sampling?
Yeah,
Here, come over here so we can get it on the recording.
Yeah, the city's public water supply wells are tested quarterly. So they have been tested quarterly. They're going to continue to be tested quarterly. So that's every 3 months.
Those city results, by the way, are on the city website, and it's we titled it CCR, the Consumer Confidence Report, and you can see those reports on our city website. All right, blue shirt.
My question is there any data or looking into absorption through the skin versus ingestion? I'm worried about, I've just been thinking about our swimming pool and spending a lot of time soaking in the water.
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now, the data shows that that absorption through the skin would be a lot less than ingestion. So the data right now says you don't need to worry about showering or swimming if there's PFAS in your water. It's a fast-moving area. Again, that could change, but as far as we are at this moment in time, it should be okay. There are looking at some biological models of skin, and I know I've seen them on the news, and I went back and asked my team about them. Those models that they were showing that you might have heard on the news, they're pieces of skin grown in the lab in vitro, so in a petri dish, and they have PFAS on them 24 hours a day, and they're measuring absorption that way. So we don't have any clear data on humans. It has to go through your skin while you're swimming or showering.
Okay, question on that side, black shirt.
Yeah, thank you. So your settlement website, I think, does a good job of explaining the whole grant application process for communities. You showed it up on your map. And that timeline is closed now. But I'm wondering if now that there's different levels for affected wells, will there be any additional opportunities to apply for grants for communities that maybe weren't affected before with the previous thresholds but now are?
Well, are you talking about the 3M settlement grant?
Sure.
Yeah. So the 3M settlement grant isn't closed yet, but we can see the end of it. And so we're going to be working to try to figure out how to apply the grant process and transition to the consent decree.
I think we just saw on the website that Whistling Valley, for example, we have some friends that live there, that they applied for the grant money, but that window closed in 2021 for that money. And then on the website, it doesn't show that there's any further years that you could apply for the money to get connected to municipal water.
So the question was about municipal water connections for neighborhoods. And so before we had the conceptual drinking water supply plan that we've been all talking about, we had some money that we were using from interest being earned, and we were taking individual applications at that time for neighborhoods. We built the rest of those neighborhoods into the plan, and so those are the things that were talked about a little bit earlier, that we've, neighborhood hookups have been put on pause, but for community municipal systems, we are making sure that those can still come in. So for instance, the well 2, which was not initially in the conceptual drinking water supply plan, that is eligible because it has the exceedances, and we're going through making those dollars available through the process. If someone has a private well that has an exceedance through the testing we talked about, we will be providing those whole home treatment systems. So whether private or public wells, there are still paths forward to be able to get treatment if you have exceedances.
Okay. So we only have the building for so long, I apologize, but we're gonna basically transition to these people being out in the hallway, so you can ask questions out there. I really appreciate everybody coming tonight, and again, look at the resources that we talked about earlier. Thank you for coming.